Hello, this is Jennifer Scales, Communications, Liberty University, Informative Speech. I have with me today 3 individuals in the conference room with me: Tracy Hart, Mark Orzelak, and Felicia James. Okay, I am here to speak with each of you about internal controls and the impact of Sarbanes-Oxley Act and how this impacts our organization. There have been many corporate scandals over the past years that show that the American public, as well as the government, that there is a need for compliance standards as it relates to public accounting and corporate auditing. Enron was one of the biggest and most financially stable companies in the United States and most known for the introduction of the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. Everyone within our organization has a responsibility over corporate internal controls. Regardless of what role you do play in, each person has a responsibility of knowing what our code of conduct is, as well as the responsibility to report anything that should go against that code of conduct or the ethics and the guardrails that actually are put forth within our organization. I am Jenny Scales, the Senior Business Control Manager for the organization, and I am required to educate each employee within the organization of the guidelines on internal controls and what your responsibility is around these controls within our organization. As part of my role, it is my responsibility to conduct semi-annual audits of each process and ensure that the compliance of those processes meet our internal controls. As a publicly held company, we are required to ensure that we have an adequate internal control structure for processes and procedures for financial reporting, as well as in ensuring the effectiveness of those internal controls and that they are operating effectively. So, main point number 1, we're going to discuss the reason why Sarbanes-Oxley was actually implemented. Number 2, I will outline for you also what internal controls are and their purpose, what COSO means and the framework of internal controls that was developed. As well, finally, we will cover your role as it relates to these internal controls. So we just covered a few of the main points of internal controls over financial reporting. So now let's review why it's important. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was actually legislation that was implemented and passed by the U.S. Congress as it was related to corporate governance and accounting reform. The stated goals of this act are to increase corporate responsibility, provide and enhance penalties for accounting and auditing improprieties as publicly traded companies, which we are, and to protect investors by improving the accuracy and reliability of those corporate disclosures made pursuant to the security laws by improving also quality and transparency within our corporate reporting and financial records. There's also a public company accounting oversight board that was established by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which has been appointed by the SEC. So we actually, as a publicly held company, are pretty much kind of mandated by these laws and legislations that has actually been adopted by the SEC, since we are publicly held. So Sarbanes-Oxley, if you remember, Enron was probably one of the biggest scandals that we actually had, or that we heard about, WorldCom, etc. But Enron was probably the very first one that really hit the radar. And Enron misrepresented its earnings that they reported to the shareholders and employees as they encouraged employees to buy their stock within their company by actually falsifying their earnings on the records, making them look very great, fabulous, and then thus asking people, their investors and their employees, to actually buy the stock, which would drive up those. The earning reports always look positive to their investors, and then those employees and the investors continue to invest in the Enron stock, even though their financial records were incorrect. The employees and the investors had no way of knowing that these records were incorrect. They had no oversight, no auditing, no back-end checks or anything of those records that anyone would know any different. Many high-up Enron officials also embezzled money from the firm while reporting these fraudulent earnings as well. The company went bankrupt because of these activities. Most of the employees lost their entire investments, which they invested in company stock, lost their retirements. They were left with nothing, and obviously their jobs, as well as the investors as well. So with that, came out of that the actual Sarbanes-Oxley of 2002, which kind of mandated that some of these vacuum controls, internal controls, etc., were actually put in place because of that with the government legislation that we spoke about. Okay? Second, internal controls are a series of policy and procedures that organizations have designed to protect their company assets, ensuring that reliable accounting procedures promote efficient operating controls and urge the adherence of the company policies by all. COSO is actually a process and framework that's been in place, but since Enron and the scandals and everything that came out of all of the accounting fraud items or issues that were going on, the framework now has been really adapted by many organizations and companies as the framework and the guardrails put in place to be able to monitor their controls, to have some type of framework to work around, which a lot of companies did not. COSO actually stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Again, been adapted by many organizations as a way to help ensure internal controls are operating effectively. This framework we have adapted within our organization, what you all know as GCS, Global Control Standards, and out of that framework, these are the actual internal control components that we kind of put up as our guardrails to be able to monitor risk, ensure fraud is not happening within our company, and to be able to monitor. So we have a lot of information here that we work as guardrails when we actually complete our assessments and we actually go through, look at our books, and management is actually involved in that process as well. Okay? Internal controls over financial reporting, again, as I said, is a series of policies and procedures that have been designed to protect our assets, make sure our accounting is intact, that it's reliable, that we actually have efficient operations occurring, and that we actually urge adherence to our company policies. Most internal controls that we have can be defined as detective or preventative. Preventative controls are designed to discourage errors or irregularities. As an example, a preventative control could be a computer application that actually checks information that's entered into the system to prevent any entry of invalid account numbers or any type of information that could be detected that way. It's more of a preventative. It recognizes, hey, this could be a potential error. Detective controls are designed to identify error or irregularities that have occurred after the information has been submitted. A manager reviewing phone bills, cell phone bills, etc., could detect improper or personal phone calls that should not be charged to the company's account, and that would be an example of more of a detective type control that has happened after the effect. Okay? Despite the various controls or categories of controls, internal control systems have their limitations, the biggest which is human error or human fraud, which does happen pretty much every day, day in and out. Could be detected, some goes without being detected. The biggest human error aspects is more around negligence, misjudgment, or confusion. Human fraud then deals also with the intention to purposely defeat the internal control. You know, typically you have human error, one that is just really, you know, hey, it just happened, we made a mistake, it's human error, you know, we can correct those things. One is where the other one is, you know, more of just purposely, somebody has purposely defrauded the company to gain some type of action. All internal controls are in place and effectively used. It is more likely that organizations' financial information will be accurately stated and will be reliable if we have good controls in place. They help to ensure that government regulations are being met and that the organization's policies are being followed. Equally important, the controls discourage theft or misuse of company assets. However, it is critical to remember that as important as a control structure is in an organization, the effective system is not 100% guaranteed that the organization will be successful in its operations. So you could still be having poor business results and have good controls in place. One is not a reflection of the other. It is not an absolute assurance either that management and the board will actually achieve their financial objectives or certain profit levels. It is reasonable assurance that the methods set out or the controls that we have in place are being properly followed by what we have designed. Many internal controls can be circumvented by collusion or by management. Simply overriding a process does happen. For whatever reason, probably no intention, made or bad intent. Sometimes there might be some overridden process that we have to do. It's just we want to make sure it's documented, clearly identified, and noted as to why that there's no fraud being detected. This basically means that since management designs and implements the control over financial reporting, that they also can override or bypass that control. Many financial statement frauds have been executed by an intentional override by senior management of what might otherwise have appeared to be effective internal controls. And it has happened within our organization as well, all the way up to senior management, even while we've had these internal controls into place. But we have measures in place, as we talked about here, to be able to monitor and identify any risk that is actually occurring, whether it's before or after. So we've talked about the framework of internal controls. Now let's discuss how you all play an important role to ensure that internal controls are in place. Understanding your role to ensure the adherence of internal controls in the SOX 404 legislation is critical to our organization. Our company's global control standards, or GCS, that we have in place is to ensure that we all, that we all adhere to the policies and procedures and play a critical role in ensuring that we strengthen our control, stability, transparency, and efficiency of the controls, ensure control productivity is being leveraged throughout our systems, and that we promote continuous assessment and monitoring of these controls. It also drives proportional ownership. So control is not just owned by one person or one person in management. We all own control. So that drives proportional ownership all the way down to even our frontline employees to make sure that everybody is aware of what should be in place and they also have an ownership in that. It increases also our management and our board's confidence in our controls as well. Every employee has the responsibility to ensure that our company records are accurately stated. This means all transactions are properly authorized, safeguards put against our assets, transactions are properly recorded, and that all laws are complied with. Part of that is adhering to our code of conduct every year. We just went through our yearly certification of our code of conduct, and it also means we do have a speak up process and being okay with speaking up if you do recognize that there is something that you identify that either potentially could be going on or that just doesn't seem right. It is okay and you should be able to speak up, and if you're not comfortable disclosing yourself, we do have an ethics line that you can report any of that information anonymously to, and all of those are actually investigated. So in conclusion, internal controls and procedures and policies are designed to give a company reasonable assurance that objectives regarding operations, financial reporting, and compliance with laws and regulations are achieved. Internal controls are not fail-proof though. The biggest limitations, again, as we said earlier, are human error and fraud. If we follow these 5 internal control components that we put in place around our global control standards, these will allow us to monitor our controls, make the necessary modifications as we need to if a control is not operating effectively. Risk management also will allow us to ensure that we are identifying, analyzing, and managing all risks that would occur through fraud or human error. This will allow our company to ensure our financial records are accurately stated and comply with all laws and regulations. So today, I do leave you with one final thought. During the last 30 days, each of us were required to review, read, and understand and certify that you understood our company code of conduct. We are all required to disclose any items that could potentially be a conflict of interest. As you leave here today, please ensure that you have a full understanding of our code of conduct as well as our company policies and procedures. If there is something that you fully do not understand, it is better to stop, ask the question, or ask for clarification than to assume. We all have a responsibility to ensure that our company's internal controls and laws and regulations are followed. And I thank you for your time today.